In recent years, there have been an increased amount of space exploration games being developed. While most rely on procedural generation to fill the unimaginable expanse of space, Ubisoft has made a title that relies on hand-created planets in a solar system that's light years away from home. Let's see if this new world brings all the life we expect in a AAA title, and experience it with some familiar faces along the way, with Starlink Battle for Atlas. Upon reaching the title screen, you're shown many images of the environment you'll be expecting to see throughout your journeys. But before we get to that, we dive through the menus. You'll notice some aliasing on the models shown off throughout these menus, but more importantly, there's a decent amount of variables to customize your experiences in-game. I wish you could remap the controls to whatever you like, but we do have options such as auto level in space and aim assist for newcomers, and my personal favorite of being able to dial back how much of the HUD you see in-game. There's also some helpful instructions on how to use the models on the Joy-Con mount, but I opted for the digital version, so we won't be needing any of that. Jumping into a new game, we see there are 4 difficulties to choose from, ranging from easy to very hard, depending on how much of a masochist you are, and it's off into the world of Atlas. You immediately get the choice of which pod to start with, ship to use, and any weapons you want to attach. After that, you get some backstory in the form of text and cutscenes. It's here that I noticed some really nice quality in animation as well as voice acting for each character. Everyone has a much different personality than the others, and it leads to some very interesting interactions between them. Some personalities may seem a bit cliche, but I actually enjoyed them. I mostly play on a 4K monitor, and you will notice the picture degrade a little bit more than other titles do. To my knowledge, this is prevalent throughout the game due to there being a dynamic resolution, but in no way do I actually think it looks unplayable, especially when I'm stretching the resolution this far. Soon after, you'll notice our favorite squadron of pilots from Corneria, Starfox, enter the fight while on their way to find Starwolf. Before we get into the space battles, I have to express how much of a good job I think they did on implementing Starfox into the Switch version of Starlink. I was expecting only glimpses at them and a story where they aren't really involved, but this is nowhere near the case. The voice acting is simply great, except for Falco in my own opinion, and their character models look stunning. And when it comes to the story, it feels like they were made into the game from the very beginning. Other characters reference them very often, and I've seen them in all the major cutscenes so far. They also acknowledge their reason for being there, and actually help them along with their mission. It has seriously made this game feel like Starfox as much as it is Starlink. A huge kudos to Ubisoft for this one. Now into the space battles. I've dabbled a bit in some other space titles, and I was a little surprised with how well this actually played. You may not feel the same amount of accuracy and movements as others, but it's pretty darn close. Personally, I opted out of all the assistance with flying and aiming and didn't have much trouble moving through the 3-dimensional void of space. It's still a bit easier to fight because projectiles will guide themselves towards target as long as you are pointing at them when you fired. I like a bit of challenge, but I'm ultimately okay with this. As it turns out, you can be pretty fragile when fighting. Learning to fight without dying isn't new to me because of playing roguelikes so often, but there were many times that I was caught off guard with how quickly my ship could be destroyed. This leads into one of the major mechanics of this game. Your lives are given to you in the form of all the spaceships in your possession. You swap between them after being taken down and come back with full health and different stats. Looking at the different ships, some will have very different stats and weight class, while others don't really seem to be that much different. Each one of them, along with the weapons, can have mods installed to them to make them more powerful or have special benefits. Pilots can also be upgraded with skill points from leveling up, and can upgrade basic stats as well as more specialized skills. All in all, I've really enjoyed the modding system, and there seems to be quite a few out there to collect. Now, I can already imagine what some people are thinking. And yes, technically, the more ships you own, whether it's through DLC or the models, will allow you to avoid the game over screen more often. But I personally think that as you play the game, switching through ships will become a matter of preference rather than a means to stay alive. Moving on. After the space fighting is done and the story progresses, you'll find yourself piloting to various planets. Using a hyperdrive as a means of covering large distances isn't as exciting as other games, but it's slow enough that you can take in some more of your surroundings like asteroid fields and bandit traps. The transition from space to planet's surface is very smooth, and with almost no notice of transition at all. This is very good for immersion. I was also happy to know that flying close to the ground can also initiate the hover mode without having to go through button mashing. From here, you use the same weapons to kill ground-based enemies, and you engage in many different quests throughout each world. This can be in the form of progressing through the main storyline, completing side quests for natives that can boost your income or knowledge of the world, scanning local wildlife, and even uncovering some secrets. It's also super nice that pretty much all of the dialogue is voice acted with a noticeable amount of quality. This is where I've spent most of my time and where I've been having a ton of fun. There's quite a bit to explore for worlds that aren't procedurally generated. Each of them have their own share of filler areas between landmarks, but each section adds to the atmosphere and environment of the planet itself. In fact, one of the most fun parts about exploring these planets is quickly boosting along across the surface. Using your ship to fly around on the first world just feels like some kind of tricked out pod racer on Tatooine. Who doesn't love that? While going from planet to planet, the game really does a great job with visually looking very good. Not only that, but each environment has key differences to their surfaces. There are times when you can start seeing some aliasing on certain models, but I haven't yet experienced any noticeable issues with frame rates dipping too low. But don't be surprised when you see some fairly low quality textures planted in front of you as you explore. But ultimately, there are probably going to be some things that you don't like. I'm not too happy with the button mapping for the boosters. It's a bit awkward trying to use the booster and changing direction with the right analog stick at the same time. Something else that might be a personal preference issue is that a lot of times when fighting enemies, the field of view seems to be a bit too cramped to see much going on around me. Also, when it comes to the weapons, there are a handful to choose from, but I find that a few are just simply a lot stronger than the others, even with having to switch around to fight enemies with elemental weaknesses. Plus, some of them are just really similar to each other except for the special effect they have on impacting the enemy. I like the fact that there are some key differences, but I had to force myself to not use the weapons that will just blast the enemies away in no time in order to enjoy what other weapons have to offer. With that in mind, there are still many opportunities that you will face that require switching to different types. What about audio?
You boys seen this? Yeah, but it's not Wolf, so who cares?
It looks like they're outnumbered.
You know what I'm thinking.
Absolutely, positively not! We came here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to take down...
Reading hostiles in the area. Nice work. Thanks for stopping by.
Partial scan complete. Scan more specimens to complete the DNA profile.
Eject! Eject!
There really wasn't a moment where I sat there wishing for better sound design. I already expressed how much I enjoy the voice acting throughout, but I also like the sounds of exploring through the landscape. Ships have a spacey whooshing sound, lasers give off a nice pew pew, local wildlife can sound really crazy at times, and the music kept me feeling energetic while dashing around in combat. They did a solid job. And since we are playing on the Switch, how's the handheld? It's actually a bit curious to me, mostly because I expected the resolution and aliasing to be fairly optimized in 720p. I'm not sure if the dynamic resolution wasn't operating properly for the amount of time I played handheld, but I feel like I've seen more aliasing than in docked mode. Other than that, I had a great time playing handheld. You don't get access to co-op without being docked, but I wouldn't want to deal with the split screen anyway. Like many other titles, this is where the game shines extra bright. Taking this anywhere I go is going to be a real treat. The last thing to note is the drop-in, drop-out style of co-op. You won't find any online functionality here, but I have to say it's a fun addition that they added any multiplayer aspect in this title at all. As a single player title, it functions very well. Activating co-op only requires a press of a button at any time, and the game doesn't really change much besides adding a new player flying around. And that's a good thing. One thing I was impressed with was just how far you could fly away from one another. You're still tethered and will be teleported if you get too far, but it's a long enough range that you could both be exploring different parts of the planet. There is an issue to this though, and I'm sure many people were expecting it. The frame rate does tend to drop every now and then when more things are happening on the screen. This is to be expected when the Switch has more to render at one time. In reality, this was an ambitious game to build for the Switch, but is it still worth going out to buy at retail price? If you're someone who cares more about the gameplay rather than the picture quality, then I say yes. After playing for many hours, I noticed that there was actually a decent amount of side quests to keep someone busy for a decent amount of time. And the story does a great job of diving into the backstory of each character to bring them more to life. The combat is especially fun for any newcomers into the space genre scene. It's especially good if you're someone who is a bit of a completionist. With that in mind, you're probably looking at hitting around the $2 per hour mark if you enjoy going through the side quests and exploring unseen areas. This could go even lower if you opt for playing through again for a harder challenge like I plan to. What really pushed the quality of this game over the edge for me was just how well they implemented Starfox into the game. You could tell me that this was meant for all versions of the game and I would probably believe you. If you're a Nintendo fan and you've been waiting for the next big Starfox title, this is the game you were never expecting but totally needed. And that's it for Starlink Battle for Atlas. Be sure to like this video if it helped you out, and subscribe to see my thoughts on upcoming titles. You can check out my social media by clicking on the links in the description below, and see what other games I have in mind to review even before a video is released.